All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello, and welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, a talky and touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. Hello, everyone. I'm Sasha Wolf, recording from Woodstock, New York. So happy to be back with you all.
Now, that's what an introduction should sound like.
No, stop it.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I can't believe you just insulted yourself when I was about to say how great you are. Okay, so hold on. Simmer down. Hold on. Joined as usual, he's already made himself known, joined as usual by Mr. Dependable, whether it's a little rainstorm or the apocalypse. I think you can count on this guy or something in between, as was the case with me. Mr. Michael Chauvin Dalton. Hello, Michael.
Oh, hi. Yes. It feels good to be recording with someone and with you, of course.
Well, thank you. And thank you for taking over, as you know, but our listeners don't know my pop passed away very suddenly, and which is obviously devastating, but also complicated. And so I've been running back and forth to the city a ton and hiding under the covers and crying. So both those things have been happening. But I want to say that today's guest is the great photographer Andrea Modica, and I loved talking to her, and it was so great to be back in the swing of recording, and I'm really happy to be here with you today. It's like my, as much as the podcast sometimes stresses me out and I have anxiety about various aspects, it's something I love to do, and so brings me a lot of joy, and so happy to be back.
Yes.
Okay, so here's a terrible segue, but warning. You know, we do love doing the podcast, but it is, as we've said a million times, really probably way too many times, that it's a lot of work. You were just telling me that you spent 2 hours prepping a guest. So this is what happens, is that we send equipment to our guests, and then you get in touch with them and you teach them how to use it. And that can be, for some people, they're very tech savvy and it's quick. And for other people, it can be a much longer process. And then some people just want to chat, whatever. So
I do love chatting with the guests. It's a lot of fun for me.
You and Taylor and I have Zoom meetings at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. And between that, we talk all the time because we're putting together our agenda, guest list, wish list. And then you are reaching out to try and get those guests. And Taylor's putting research together for me. And so it's turned into quite a big production. And, we're really proud of it. Okay, so all of this to say, people, you got to donate. We're not depending on you. Don't feel. I don't want you to feel too much pressure. That's not a fun feeling. I'm happy to say we've actually raised money already from private donors, but
yes, thank you.
We are also, I don't know if we're counting on the listeners to donate, but there's something about the amount of really moving mail messages and emails that we've gotten over the past 3 years. I mean, I personally get almost one a day. Okay. So about how much the podcast has gotten someone back into photographing or just helped them so much or given them a sense of community, on and on and on. I feel, and I know you feel this way too, that this is our listeners' podcast, right? Like it's we're all in this together and we make it, but we really feel the audience. And we know the audience is very active by how many downloads there are, which is well over 100,000. And listen, so with that in mind, I just really urge people to take some ownership and involvement by going on the website and donating $10 or $20. if you want to donate $5, it's really not about the amount of money. I think it would feel good to us if people would do that.
Yeah, a little affirmation, and there is an open box to put in whatever you want.
Right. Yep.
Yes.
Put in whatever you want. But I think it would feel really good. And there are things that we want to do down the line for the community. And I don't want this to sound like a threat, but but it is. We need to know that you're committed and supportive of this thing we're building. We're not asking you to do anything. We're going to do all the work. We're just asking for a little financial help. So we know you're there and you're paying attention and you want to be part of this community that we're building. And that's it. Look, okay, I'm moving on.
Well, it's photowork.foundation.
Yes, photowork.foundation. I feel like if anyone from like PBS heard my pitch, they would be groaning. Like, that's everything you're not supposed to do. Make your audience feel guilty. Oh boy. Oh well. Okay. I apologize if I offended anyone. Doing the best I can.
Hey, listen, and if you can't, please keep sending those comments, though. We do love the comments.
Absolutely. If, for sure. I guess it's just, it is really nice to feel like there's a back and forth between us. That's what I was really trying to say very badly. But anyway, I have a lot on my mind.
That's right.
Well, this was really a wonderful episode, I think. What did you think?
Oh, absolutely. I've actually known Andrea for quite some time. We have a funny connection. Her, I believe, cousin's son coached my son in lacrosse.
Oh my God.
And I love Andrea, and I was so happy that you were able to have this show with her. And I learned things I didn't know. And the way Andrea talks about being able to make work without knowing or worrying about whether or not anyone was going to see it, that was just a wonderful conversation. Yeah. And there's so much good stuff. The idea of making work and having joy while making work. It's just such a beautiful conversation.
And Andrea is, a large format specialist and makes platinum contact prints. And I think she's the first guest that I've had on who sort of specializes in that type of printing. And, we don't get into the chemistry, but we talk about that a bit. And that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. That had its own challenges as being a woman in the art world. And you have a really good conversation about that.
Right. Yeah. That comes up again. Yep. Absolutely. All right. Yeah. Well, without further ado, since I hogged all the intro time by guilting our poor audience, without further ado, Michael, if you don't mind, please take it away.
Well, welcome back. And it's my pleasure. Here is your conversation with Andrea Modica.
Andrea Modica, welcome to the PhotoWork podcast. It's great to have you on. Thank you so much for spending the morning with me. And we'll start how we always do, which is with the guest, just telling us all about your journey, how you got started, where you're from, and where you are now, and all the fun details. So take it away.
Wow, that's a big question. I've been around for a while. I born and raised in Brooklyn, went to a state school, SUNY Purchase, which was fantastic.
Wait, hold on. What the F? I went to SUNY Purchase.
Really? When?
Yeah.
For what?
Yes. It's really funny that I didn't know that after doing all this research on you. Somehow I missed that. I was blinded by Yale and the Guggenheim. Okay, well, we can talk about that another time, but I will concur that Purchase is an amazing place.
Amazing place, but you have to tell me what you studied there.
Well, I studied a lot of things, and for those of us who went to Purchase, that'll make a lot of sense because there's a lot of freedom, or at least there was. But my degree was in creative writing, literature and creative writing, but I I studied photography and a lot of film, and then I went on and studied film at NYU afterwards. But yeah, I studied literature and writing was my major. That's what I graduated with. But I took classes with Jed Devine and Jan Groover. They were there when I was there. So.
But also maybe Belle Chevigné and Lee Schlesinger?
Yeah, well, Lee I took, of course, literature classes with. And I mean, my main people were Bob Stein, Louise Allen, and Lee Schlesinger. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's such a great place.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. We had them come in. What year did you graduate?
87. And I will say that I've probably made this joke on the podcast before, but it's actually true, which is that I got called into the Dean of Students office in my 5th year, and she told me I had to leave, that I had too many credits and I couldn't stay any longer.
Oh, it's
and I was like, but I don't ever want to leave. I want to live here. I want to be here for the rest of my life. And she was like, I understand, but it's time for you to go out into the world. So that was how much I loved it. Well, okay, so tell me about you at Purchase.
Well, I discovered art in high school. I was very, very lucky. I had a great art teacher, Len Bellinger. And so I went in to study painting. I was really interested in conceptual art, as I am still, and took photography, as so many of us do, because I thought it'd be fairly easy. And of course, after the first week, it really was harder than anything else, and actually
Surprise.
more conceptually based than I, of course, could ever have imagined without having gotten started making pictures. And that's really what grabbed me, the way the world changed so drastically, but to many imperceptibly when it was photographed. So that really excited me right out of the gate. And again, in a very conceptual manner. And it continues to motivate me. And then I continued on to graduate school, etc.
So did you major in photography at Purchase?
I majored in visual arts, remember?
Yep, I did.
So I had to do a thesis, of course. We had to, I don't know if they're still doing that, but, and I did choose to do a thesis in photography.
Okay, yep. And then, so you went on to graduate school. So was it right after Purchase that you went to Yale?
No, I took some time off, which I think is a good idea. And I advise my students to do the same.
What was it like when you got to Yale? Was that, because I assume, but maybe I'm wrong, tell me, I assume that being at Yale felt different than being at Purchase, but maybe not.
Well, I was asked to work harder than I thought was physically possible. Mm-hmm. And that really, that wasn't going on for me anyway at Purchase. I thought I was working a lot. I thought I was obsessively working into the night. But Yale was a whole different can of worms. And that set the stage for the rest of my life and my work ethic. So that was a very good thing.
Who were the main people around you, professors or people of influence when you were there?
I went to study with Richard Benson. Then the small camera was most popular among the students. I was already using a lot. I went straight to the big camera at Purchase after one term. Mm-hmm. And as you might recall, one of the great things about that school is there was a lot of equipment to lend. And, I used the 8x10 almost exclusively. And so I went to Yale with that camera. And also making platinum prints, which I learned from Jed Devine at Purchase. And Jed said, if you're going to keep printing like this, then the person you might want to find is Richard Benson. And that's why I applied to Yale.
Can you explain that to people who don't know the legacy of the great Richard Benson?
Well, Richard, who was a phenomenal person, generous teacher, brilliant man, was also a great printer, maybe the great printer of photography. So I went to study with him, and he was He was great. He was fantastic. But the work I was doing wasn't really in step with what was popular, I think, at the time.
What
Again,
was
using
popular?
in the small camera. So I didn't even fully understand the influences that many of my colleagues had before they went to Yale, the interests that they had in Winogrand, Frank.
Right, so you're talking about 35 millimeter, probably Leicas, and people more street style shooting or road photography, that type of thing.
Well, handheld, small or medium format, yes. And in fact, what was so interesting for me was trying to use the camera, the big camera, as much as I could. I was being influenced by what was around me. So I was using it like a small camera, which was, of course, absurd, but a great, and again, it's still something I do today, to see how far I can push it. I think it's, it's useful to stick with one camera and one lens, and maybe I've overdone it, but I still have these decades later. So I was, encouraged, let's say, to stop using the big camera. And I kept using it. So there you have it. My first big stubborn move.
I think it's worked out well for you.
Well, I pretty much have done what I want to do. And I don't know where I got that idea. But part of it is that I didn't think, and Yale certainly reinforced this, I didn't think anybody would care. I didn't think anybody would be looking. I didn't think it would matter. So I, first and foremost, was in it to get up in the morning and want to grab the camera I wanted to grab and do the work I want to do. And I still live that way, and I teach that way.
I mean, is that, I'm sort of being goofy and stating the obvious in the form of a question, but, how important is it to stay connected to working in a way that you love?
Well, I don't know what else there is, because it's a, it's a field that, the likelihood that anybody will look and care is pretty low, right?
Right.
Don't you think?
Yes,
so,
I agree.
So I guess there are really two ways that a young person can go about. One is to see what's going on and try to fit in and be influenced by and such. And the other is to just do the work you want to be doing, regardless. And my argument is that you go in winning, because, nobody can take that joy away from you.
I think this is a really, really important point. These are two, really prominent and very different schools of thought. One is the importance of the new and being current and pushing form and pushing process and showing the world new forms and new ways of working. And the other is what you just said, which is, find what brings you joy, because you probably aren't going to become famous anyway, and make sure that you love your process. And, I think I come down there. I think it's just so important. You have one life to live, to love as many minutes of it as you possibly can, because life is, as we know, also extremely difficult, extremely challenging, filled with a lot of loss and sadness. That's just the nature of life. So I think it's so important to be in love with your process. But I understand the other argument as well. I mean, it's the sort of argument of modern art. But, I constantly also sort of push back against that, because I think there's a lot of booby traps in that other way of working. But look, I know really successful photographers who have taken that other way to heart and are constantly just thinking about what they can do differently, show different work. But I don't know if that's head versus heart or what it is. But anyway, I'm hijacking the conversation. Sorry about that.
Well, that might be the very thing that gives them joy, by the way.
Right.
But I also don't think that there's such a difference between the new and what gives you pleasure, what the thing that you want to do. If a photographer, young person I teach, is true to doing what they want to do, it's usually the best work they can do. I've been doing this.
I agree.
I've been doing this for 4 decades. I can't tell you how much this has proven true over and over again. Just yesterday, I had a senior tell me, he was a bit embarrassed by this, actually. It was our first meeting for the term, In fact, our first meeting for the year. And I'll be working very closely with him. And he said, I've gotten to the point where I got to tell you the truth. I got to be honest. I'm so sorry, but I really don't care what anybody thinks anymore. And I thought, now we will begin. Mm-hmm. And then the same day I got an email from a student who sent me work of 2 prominent photographers. And she said, this is the emotional spirit that I want to capture in my work. I thought, this is really doing things a bit backwards. But It's my job to help her do what she wants to do. But I did point out I thought it was backwards.
Mm-hmm. You want to explain that a little bit?
I want her to find her own emotional spirit, yes. quote unquote, yep. And not, find somebody else's. Because, by the way, Sasha, that is new. Because only one person has that emotional spirit. What is ridiculous
I agree.
term?
Yay, hear, hear.
But so circling back to you saying there's the new and the joy, I'm telling you it's the joy that brings the next new.
Well, I completely agree with that. Believe me, I didn't mean to make them. There's the tyranny, what I call the tyranny of the new, which is the sort of pressure on artists to always be creating new forms, which I think is almost impossible to do. And then my position, which is, if you do work, just to be corny, but from your heart, whatever, from your gut, and you stay true to what you want to talk about, then it will be new because there's only one you.
Exactly right. And it's also the great joy of teaching is that you get to see that over and over again. Mm-hmm. Things that you can't even begin to imagine.
Yeah.
No matter how many decades of experience you have making pictures.
Yeah. Well, let's talk more about you. So what was your first body of work that, did bring you, some attention that other people were interested in other than you? Well,
I suppose it would have to be Treadwell.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the book, though, that came before Treadwell was Minor League.
Right.
Even though Treadwell had already begun. So that book, which was put together by Connie Sullivan for the Smithsonian series, Artists at Work, Photographers at Work, that was at first glance going to be Treadwell. And Connie said, no, there's too much work here for this project. So she saw then the Minor League work and published that. And then maybe 3 or 4 years later, maybe sooner, actually, published Treadwell, which was a much bigger book and, bigger run.
And you want to tell people what Treadwell is?
At 25, I got a job teaching at another state school, SUNY, up in Oneonta, and I had to learn how to drive. Mm-hmm. And I, was used to living only in cities, traveling around by bicycle and train and bus, all with my 8x10. Now I had a car. In some ways, of course, it was a lot easier, but there were no people around. It was kind of alarming. In 1985, there was no internet, but there certainly was television, and people were inside a lot. So I drove around and just looked for people to photograph because I'm interested in photographing people. And there was a group of people out in this old farmhouse, and it was this family, a very big family. 21 people were living in the house, and I just stopped and said, "Can I please take some pictures?" And they said yes. And then I went and got the 8x10, and one thing led to another. They moved. I had pictures to give them. I defined them, so I photographed them in a new place. They moved again. In the 15 years of photographing, they lived in over 30 places, but all in that region. So my backdrop, as tough a life as that created for them, my backdrop kept changing. It's a long project. It wasn't meant to be a project. I wasn't project-oriented. I just wanted desperately to take pictures, and they let me. And there you have it.
That body of work, I think, brought you a certain amount of acclaim. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty. I have to say, circling back to that, the beginning of this conversation, I was pretty surprised because I had a job mind you, a humble income, but enough. And I thought this is better than I had been sleeping for a living at a psychiatric halfway house through graduate school. I did that job full time for 3 years. So I thought, wow, this is pretty good, this teaching job, which, was a big job, actually. It was 4 days a week and mixing all the chemicals and taking care of the big job, big out-of-school job. It was a great job. But it was, not sleeping at a halfway house. I thought I would, was really lucky. Well, I was very lucky. And, oh my God, Sasha, what was your question?
Oh, just about Treadwell bringing you a certain amount of
yeah, so
attention.
Again, Sasha, that living up there, especially, my goodness, before the internet, it was really isolating. So that coupled with the belief that nobody would see the work really opened up the world for me in terms of trying all kinds of things and, sticking with one subject, one family that I, of course, created a relationship with that had nothing to do with photography, but also being challenged in terms of photography because photographing one group of people over and over again, I couldn't keep taking the same picture. So I took many, as I think the people I admire the most do, many failures. And it didn't matter. I was just obsessed with photographing. And I didn't expect anybody to notice. But I had a couple of people in my life early on. One was Lois Connor. Maybe she was really the most important person in terms of
we love Lois Connor.
Yeah, in every way. I mean, she's my sister, really.
Yeah, fabulous person.
Yeah. So, very early on, we were introduced. When I was still a student, she had gone there a few years before I did. And we were introduced because I was kind of getting the same response to using the camera and printing in platinum that Lois had a few years earlier. And one of her colleagues from one of her classmates was one of my teachers. And he said, you got to meet this woman. They were telling her, the same thing. Mm-hmm. And we just became instant friends, but more to the point of your question, she just did so much to help me. And she introduced me to her friend, then fairly unknown Sally Mann. Sally and I became great friends. And there was this group of very strong, amazing women with large cameras that came, that are my core. And, when I was in graduate school, I was criticized at one point, these words actually happened, of having work that was female. And that was not meant in a positive way. It didn't happen a lot, but it happened once, and it stung. And it made me think about, it makes me think about when I was in college and I took a history photography class, we used Beaumont Newhall. Did you use Beaumont Newhall history photography?
Still have the book? Yep.
I do too, and I just dug this quote up because it stung. When he wrote about, there were so few women, of course, is there anybody of color in that book, but so few women. And Julia Margaret Cameron was one. And what he wrote basically was the portraits, which were primarily portraits of the quote-unquote great men, were, her legacy, her great work, and that the tableaux were, quote, this is a quote, dripping in sentimentality. And as an 18, 20-year-old, I understood somehow, even though the class was taught by a man, this was just not mentioned at all. I understood that had something to do with her being a woman. And I never forgot that. And then this thing happened in grad school. And then I stumbled upon, luckily, it was Stephen Shear who introduced me to Lois Connor. And I found my people. I found, anyway, so I can't tell you how many letters, physical letters I have still that begin with Sally Mann recommended I contact you. Lois Connor told me to give you a call, So I was very surprised by that. And of course, that opened up the world for me. My first gallery was Lieberman and Saul, and they took a real chance. I was quite young. And Sally encouraged Maria Mars Hamburg to look at the show. Mm-hmm. She bought a couple of pieces for the Met and then ultimately wrote the introduction for Treadwell. So one thing leads to another, but I love men, but have I mentioned one in my story yet, except for Richard Benson, of course. And there have been many, but it's this group of women that have really, helped me, and without my asking, I must be frank.
Yeah.
So I was surprised and pleased and having fun, and but it changed things, no question about it. I was no longer working in a vacuum upstate New York, and there was something joyful about that changed. Mm-hmm. People who are starting out today, they're never working in a vacuum. I feel sorry for them, actually, because I think there's something great about being disconnected, and as a photographer where, our clay is the world, just being in the moment in the world.
And not being distracted by how people are responding to each picture you make and practically
and also,
in real time.
Right, and exactly right. And having, of course, the 8x10 still demands that I take time to process the film and wait for it to dry. Before I can even look at it. Mm-hmm. So that's something I still value a lot. And I work regularly in the darkroom in the winter. I'm in the thick of it right now. And it's heaven. I mean, it's just fantastic that there's no phone in there. It's just great.
You make platinum contact prints?
I do.
Let's talk about that because, we're also living in a time where there's a lot of debate, for better or worse, about the importance of the object. And obviously, you can't get more object-oriented than a platinum contact print. So, I'm interested in your thoughts about that, about the object and its importance. And also for someone who makes a lot of books, then how does that translate?
A lot of parts of that question, but in the beginning, when I was making platinum prints and started to get some attention for Treadwell and having shows and such, I'd see occasionally my work printed in newsprint, which I guess would be the equivalent of looking at it on a telephone right now. Mm-hmm. And I remember, in my 20s saying, if this picture doesn't work in newsprint, it's not a good picture. It needs to be shredded. So I still think that, of course, an image should be able to translate in different media. Yeah. But I love holding a beautiful object. I'm still a sucker for beautiful print, and
me too.
Probably more importantly, I really I'm still obsessed with making them, and I still get excited. The platinum, I don't know how a negative is going to translate, even after all these decades. And I'm good. I'm a good printer, but I like to hand it over. The meaning of the photograph handed over to the printing process a little bit and continue to be surprised by that. So that if a print comes out a little dark, that, the meaning changes, of course. And that interests me and that can still surprise me. So I like getting things a little wrong and learning from that and then taking it from there. You see?
Yeah.
So making a print by hand, one at a time, it still provides that for me. It still surprises and delights and teaches me.
Well, even on your website, you can really get lost in the individual images. I mean, the sort of tonal range is mind-boggling and just so stunning.
Oh, thank you.
Sometime I'm just going to have to make a pilgrimage to you so I can get you drunk, and then you'll let me go through boxes of prints.
I've had somebody here doing that, and it's actually, it's fun because like the printing process, he's seeing things I would see and making connections of my work from the first pictures I made at Purchase, which is kind of a mind-boggling, but again, teaching me. So Sasha, I would love that. Please come.
Oh my God.
Here.
Can I?
You know, would you please?
Yes. Are you kidding? Oh my God. It's like that's my dream. It's like, I always think, getting invited to a great photographer's home to look through those fantastic boxes of prints that they have is like, the equivalent of being a deep sea diver who's looking for buried treasure, except, of course it's not buried. But for me, it's like, it's just so thrilling. It's the most exciting, thrilling experience. I mean, I remember when I first met Barbara Bosworth, who I work with now, but, going to her studio and opening up boxes, and she has a lot of contact prints also, but just, my head exploded. I mean, it was just so overwhelming. Just the joy, the amount of joy was just staggering.
Thank you for saying those nice things. And Barbara is great. Another view camera woman.
Yep.
And can I point out that these women, Lois least of all, but in general, using the view camera in ways that we were not really taught to use the view camera. Mm-hmm. Sharpness is not everything.
Yep.
Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah.
Barbara, great photographer, and again, view camera. So please come because
Okay, I'll be there.
In fact, if you want to scrap all this so far and just start over with prints in front of us, it might make more sense.
Well, that will just be number 2.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I mean, you and Barbara, you have some commonalities. There's a certain, in some of your work, not in all of your work, but in some of your work, in some of Treadwell and other work, there's that very poetic expression in the image that's created by emotion and a looseness. And as you said, not everything's sharp, and that informs one's response to the picture. And
I thank you for putting us in the same sentence. I don't know Barbara that well. I have met her, and she's wonderful, but I know her work really well. And so I won't speak for her, but I will say that I've had the privilege of looking at the outtakes of some of these other women I've mentioned. And you mentioned looseness. I mean, the thing that goes hand in hand with that, I'm going to say this again, are, a lot of pictures that are not very good. We don't see them, hopefully, they're a stack of outtakes. You see my point? So that looseness, I think, can provide us as practitioners with more surprises.
Yep.
And that's really the addiction, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I always, think of those pictures as, a sketch. It's a certain amount of playing around and just letting yourself go and using your intuition and having faith.
Yeah, well, that's for sure.
So let's talk about your new work, which I'm not going to try and pronounce because it would be embarrassing. But let's talk about the new book, which you can tell us about.
Well, I've been working for 8 years at a horse clinic in Italy, outside of Bologna, and photographing horses in recovery after operations. And because I've been doing it for so long, or had been doing it for so long, I figured out things to keep me interested in between the operations. So I started photographing the tools, as well as the tools before and the tools after, as well as then this last facet of the work are these phantoms that are devices used to stand in for mares when sperm is collected for reproductive purposes. How's that for a summing it up?
And this book was published by TIS.
Yes.
It's a beautiful book.
They did an amazing job. Oh my goodness. My first fold-outs in my life.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. It works really, really well.
And Carl Woolley did the design. TIS is Nelson Chan and Carl Woolley.
Yep.
And Nelson was the production person for books at Aperture. So
that's right.
I really had, a great, great pair of people.
Yeah, they're doing
helping
great work.
Me. Mm-hmm.
One thing I noticed with your various portfolios of work is that, some of them are like Treadwell and other work that's sort of more, we have to find our way in. It's not as specific. It's not as clear. And then some of your bodies of work are extremely specific, like this new body of work and like the portfolio you did, pandemic boxes.
Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with Human Being? Because it probably started there, the skulls from the mental hospital. Yeah.
Which are, again, they're really spectacular even on the computer. It's really crazy. But yeah, I'm interested in that as a concept of sort of going back and forth between the sort of more ethereal is not the right word. I can't come up with the right word. And these very specific bodies of work that you may lose some. Well, I guess you could think of that either way. But I was thinking you might lose some viewers with some of this very specific work if it's just not for them. Does that cross your mind? Do you care?
Oh, my goodness. I can't even imagine how many viewers I never would have with Treadwell, for goodness sake, for the opposite reason.
Right.
So
no, that's true.
That book got its share of criticism. So I don't know. I got to say, I don't think about that.
Yeah.
Not thinking about that. I do think that, there is, though, a thread through maybe starting with minor league of this almost scientific, view of a subject, but also, coming to terms with it. That was, I was a young, straight woman looking at these very gorgeous men who were kind of exhibiting some things that were uncomfortable for me.
This was the minor league Yankees.
Yeah,
right?
Believe me, I'm going to get back to this new work. So there's that. Then there is January 1, which are the mummers, which are men who dress as women, and also quite like the baseball players. There's something very kind of fun about what they're doing. It's a party. These guys, the baseball players, of course, are playing a game. And yet there is a display there of, speaking of the mummers, let's just say, again, some scary behavior for me. And then I find myself in an operating room watching horses, these very spectacular, very, very valuable horses in their most vulnerable state. So there's something, this work I think is not really about the horses. It's really being on the other side of middle age for me. That's what I think that exploration was. At the time, can I tell you? No. I can never talk about it while I'm in the middle of making it, but looking at it at this point, I understand it's about these magnificent beings being cut down to their most vulnerable. When I started that project in my early 50s, I'd never had an operation, but I didn't think much about it. But this had me thinking about all that. A horse would come in designated to have one leg worked on a knee, and the surgeon would say, hey, he's limping on the other side. Let's do another x-ray. Sure enough, the doctor sent the horse in with the wrong leg to be operated on paper. The surgeon caught it just by looking, by being observant. Those things happen to us, of course.
Yep.
So I'm looking closely at that. That's what I think it's about in the end. And like the baseball players, the skulls, the mummers, there is a certain amount of beauty to the presentation, which is important to the meaning of the picture. It's first of all, I simply like making and looking at these beautiful prints, as we've already established, but it's a seductive device, I suppose, to maybe I'll get a little bit more of an audience with that. But yeah, I didn't think about that, losing the audience. I don't know that I mean, who is the audience?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the January 1st project, the Mummers, is very frightening. I mean, I find the pictures intimidating. Or I should say, I find the people in the pictures intimidating.
Agreed.
It's sort of really disquieting. And I understand what you're saying. I mean, the pictures are so beautiful. The images are so beautiful that you get locked in. But for me personally, I got locked into a space that was an uncomfortable space. So mission accomplished.
Although my mission was, as a newcomer to Philadelphia, was to explore my new city. That was my mission. So what was accomplished was not my mission. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense.
Getting back to that point about being in the world and not in my head.
So are you often photographing things that make you uncomfortable?
You know, it's starting to seem that way, isn't it now?
Yeah. I mean, is it a way of coming to terms with things, to be more comfortable, to push yourself into these spaces where you have to, maybe you'll find out that they're not as scary, or maybe they will be as scary, but you'll survive?
Maybe all of the above, redeeming qualities, but also, you know, some kind of Sontagian ownership, you know, control over, you know, if I look this thing in the eye, yeah, maybe it's not going to kill me. And if I can contain it in this rectangle and make a beautiful print of it, maybe in some way it's mine. And it's not something out there that is going to, I mean, obviously.
Like the boogeyman.
I mean, obviously, I am going to die, but find it as much as I can.
Yeah. Do you think the large format camera gives you a kind of like superpower, a sort of strength? Like at least there's something between you and this thing that may be intimidating or possibly threatening?
Oh, there's a few things about that. Okay. One is that it's, you know, it's just something to pay attention to. If what is beyond the camera is too much for me to pay attention to, it's also conceptually endlessly interesting to me what people, and I can come back to the horses with this because of course they're not people, but what people do in front of that big camera. And what they and how that has changed over the decades of my becoming an older woman from a very young woman, and how I'm looking at the world differently and the world is looking differently at me. That all affects the meaning of the picture. And I believe that, of course, when the process is slowed down with a view camera, that stuff is accentuated because it's present. It's more than accentuated. It's present in a way that if you're using a small camera and invisible, of course, it's not present, that kind of interaction. That is very much a conceptual point to the work, in fact. So, you know, there really is no possibility of making anything that resembles a document. Now, with the horses, I had 5 to 10 minutes to take those pictures. So that was almost an athletic feat that I found really compelling. You know how it is. You do something, you want to do the next thing that's going to be difficult. It was really the stupidest camera to use for that work. You know, I mean, it would take me sometimes 10 minutes to set up the picture after they moved the horse in. And then, you know, he'd start moving little ear, and the anesthesiologist would slam close the doors. So there was a heightened adrenaline rush for me. Of course, the horse didn't know anything about this. So That's not part of the concept of the work, but it definitely, I think that, everything feeds the meaning of the work. So I think there's something of that adrenaline in that work that wouldn't be there. In some ways, it's the stupidest camera on earth to use, but it's also the perfect camera.
Well, it's definitely the perfect camera for you. So I think we'll end on that note. Andrea, thank you so much for doing this with me. I'm so appreciative. I'm such a big fan of yours, and
Sasha, just come down here with we'll open up a bottle and have some fun looking at work and talking more.
No, it's happening. It's happening. So that will be a great treat. And then you will have to come to the Airstream and sit in front of the fireplace and hang out with me here. So
that would be great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and be well. And hopefully I'll see you soon.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is produced by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. The associate producer is Taylor Selsback, and the executive producer is Sasha Wolf. Our theme music is by J. Walter Hawks. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe and rate us with all the stars available on your listening platform.